All right, people, it is officially the end of the year. We've got only one more episode, I should say, one more episode left after this one. We're recording this one a little bit early. I'm not quite sure when these are going to be up on the audio feeds, but for right now, we are ending the year with one of the two big year-end movie release date drops. I've got Nathaniel Ahart back on. Nathaniel hasn't been on since our Elvis episode when we had a lot of fun breaking down. Oh, so much fun breaking down that movie. And this is another one, you could say almost in the same spirit as Elvis, and that is a movie about Hollywood, not necessarily a Hollywood figure, from one of our favorite directors, that being Damien Chazelle. He hasn't made a movie since 2018's First Man, and he is back for easily the biggest movie that he's ever done, that being Babylon. I mean, the title alone speaks for itself, right?
Yeah, no, absolute debauchery at its absolute finest. Hey, thanks again for having me on. I can't wait to thoughts here on it because there's a lot to say about this film here.
Yeah, 100%, 100%. Maybe some latency issues throughout, but for now, all of that and more. Stay tuned. What is going on, people? I'm back with Nathaniel Ahart. We are here to talk about Damien Chazelle's fourth feature film, that being Babylon. This is a movie that has had an interesting track record to this point, right? Obviously, coming out of the pandemic, we're not sure really what is going on with any movies and any feature filmmakers. And Nathaniel, I think it's safe to say that these last couple of months have almost been like kind of a return to form. You know, there's been a lot of movies that have been coming out these last couple of months that have very much more so been in our camp. You know, less of the superhero fare, more of awards fare, but not quite awards bait. You know, not quite movies that felt like they were made during the pandemic. This is a bunch of movies that just feel like they speak to us. You know, I feel like it started with Banshees of Inisherin. You know, Don't Worry, Darling tried to kick that off, and then, well, we all know how that went. You know, then we had movies like Tar, The Menu, to name just a few, you know, The Fablemans from Steven Spielberg. And this is kind of following in just like a long trend of movies that are basically trying to say like movies are back, right? You know, Avatar 2, I feel like you could also maybe throw in that camp. The idea that it's like, okay, these movies are big, these movies are crazy, these movies are nuts, these movies are throwing a lot of ideas at you, and they are most importantly meant to be seen in theaters. Even though the gap between theatrical releases and actually being viewed at home has gotten astronomically smaller, it feels like, I think it's safe to say, for the first time since we got out of COVID, right, that the studios have been trying to do it, but it feels like it's safe to say that going to the theaters to watch stuff is back. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, I would, and especially with Avatar because I mean that was such a huge film, and that's why maybe it doesn't fall into the kind of like traditional films that we watch, like the award films, even though it's going to be one. But it really was such a big event, and when I went to my screening, there were so many people there. Unlike with this film, which I'm sure we will get
Yeah.
into.
Oh, we will get
But
into that for sure. Absolutely. I mean, my theater was pretty full, but I also think that like they were being a little bit harsh with those opening numbers as well. Cause I'm like, I don't, again, these two movies are running virtually like competition-less, you know? And Babylon, while yes, having a big budget, does not have Avatar's budget. It doesn't need to do Avatar numbers. There
no,
is a chance that it can make back its budget, you know? So I think all of this kind of hopping on the bandwagon of, oh, it's such a bomb already. It's like, yeah, it had a bad opening weekend, but it can still pick up its pace, you know? It only, cost 80 million? So that only means it needs to clear, 160 million to break even?
I
Like,
I think it was 150 or something.
something like that. But,
I'll double check
yes.
that.
Yeah. So that brings us to kind of the end of the year, right? And the end of the year, you know, that's always like a big time. You know, it's always like, okay, what's going to be like the movie of the year, you know? And for this year, it seemed like it was going to be between three: Avatar 2,
Mhm.
Glass Onion on Netflix, which we will be covering at some point in the near future as well, and this movie, Babylon. You got three big name filmmakers, three filmmakers who haven't put out a movie since before the pandemic, three filmmakers who, again, some of whom we've been waiting, you know, very long time to see one of their movies, you know? And Chazelle's an interesting one because Chazelle is that guy who it's like, okay, he's a young, at the time, you know, this is almost 10 years ago now, but it's like, okay, he's a young up and coming filmmaker. And I feel like in a strange way, Chazelle is the one that kicks off, for lack of a better word, like what I like to call the new film brat generation, you know, because following him up, you know, you get guys like Jordan Peele, you get guys like Ari Aster, Corey Finley, Barry Jenkins, all of those guys that have kind of like, effectively made their voices known as far as like being like the future of Hollywood, right? Like as far as like the guys that you want to look forward to whenever they put out a new movie. Chazelle kind of kicked the doors off of all of that by putting out Whiplash, which is a movie that felt very intensely original, very intensely personal, and most of all, just intense. This guy is an intense filmmaker, you know, which I think is why his second feature film, La La Land, caused a bit of confusion, because that was when he went the total opposite direction of Whiplash. You know, I feel like people were expecting not what they got. And I feel like that's kind of why there is a little bit of controversy over La La Land. In hindsight, like, I feel like the biggest thing that movie had going against it was the fact that it was a musical, but also like not really a consistent musical. If anything, you know, it's like, I'm like, okay, the movie parts of this are actually really good and I'm really into, but the musical parts almost feel like they're in a completely different movie, you know? And like, as far as like being an homage to like 50s era, you know, musical, when Hollywood was just putting out like a musical a week, you know, I'm like, okay, I get that. That's all fine and good, you know? And then it's when First Man comes out that I'm like, what is he doing? You know, like I can't really get a grasp on what he's doing. You know, like it's ironic because another person who is, you know, a pretty big name in the new film rat generation, Jordan Peele, put out his third feature film this year, Nope, which was a movie that had, I would say, like mid level reviews when it first came out, and now is kind of, I feel like, gained this almost second life right now. And I feel like with Nope, Jordan Peele has solidified his voice where he is as good as much as I enjoyed Us. I feel like it may not have been that consistent with Us. And Damien Chazelle was somebody who I'm like, I don't really know what exactly he's going for with each of his movies. You know, the first two was like, okay, they seem to be very music centric, you know, and the third one, it's like, okay, so he's making a biopic where half the time they don't speak, and where one of the most momentous occasions in the history of mankind is presented as just, I don't know, like we saw First Man together, like that, like how moon landing the most underwhelming part of that movie.
It was kind of getting to the point that it was kind of boring by the end, and I was like, yeah, everyone's saying, oh, this is amazing. I'm like, yeah, I mean, it looked nice.
Right.
I don't know.
But it's like we saw that in IMAX, and it's the moon landing. And I was like fighting a coma during it. I'm like, no disrespect to the filmmaking, because the filmmaking was beautiful, but
Great,
I really, at that point, like he had such a strong kickoff. I'm like, please don't tell me that this is it, that Whiplash is it, you know? And
well, we'll get into
yeah, well, so saving it for when we build up to.
Yeah.
So naturally, that I heard about this movie, and I'm like, wait a minute, he's making a 3-hour-long epic about the transition from silent films into talking films. Brad Pitt's going to be in it. At the time, Emma Stone was in the Margot Robbie part. She ended up leaving the role. I don't remember if it was creative differences or if she ended up having scheduling conflicts, because I know she was also shooting Yorgos Lanthimos' new movie, which is set to come out next year. So they bring in Margot Robbie, and the rest of the cast is being announced. And I'm like, oh, I think at one point, there was one point where this was almost like a Departed situation where this movie almost had a completely different cast, save for the Brad Pitt part, which was always pretty locked in from the beginning. What's it called? I think that at one point, Michael B. Jordan was being considered for the Home Adepo, the Sydney part. That might have been a complete, like, farcical rumor, but like, or maybe it was John David Washington. I'm not sure, but it was one of those two. And so, but I hear about this movie, and like, this is one of those movies where I'm like, I almost don't even care. I almost don't even care who's attached to it. I almost don't even care who's directing this. This is a movie that is like made for me. I'm like, it's following in the vein of Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, where it's kind of a movie about a certain sect of Hollywood history being told for the modern day, because we all know it's been solidified at this point. Hollywood is the best at telling stories about themselves. You know, it's a movie with a big name cast, and it's a movie from a director who, at that point, it's almost like I completely forgot about First Man and La La Land. I'm like, this, he will kick ass at. I'm like, and then I'm like, so the reviews start coming out, and I'm like, okay. I'm like, I mean, this is probably to be expected. You know, this movie is not opening in the 90s or early 2000s. This movie is opening up against a giant spectacle level affair and a big Netflix move, Christmassy theme, not Christmassy theme, but like kind of comfy, having fun, stay at the home. Like Glass Onion is a perfect streaming movie, is what I'm trying to say, you know? And I'm like, okay, I can understand why this movie could probably kind of be slipping through the cracks, but they made a very ambitious choice with this movie, and we'll break down whether what the reasons were for why they made that choice, which is they didn't open this movie in any festivals. They did not do this at a festival run. They did this, just opened it straight wide. You know, originally it was going to be, they were going to do this limited at Christmas and then open it wide in January. And then they made the decision to open it wide at Christmas, to just go right up against Avatar. And in hindsight, you think that was the right choice?
I don't know, because it's one of those things where it's like it makes sense that it's coming out in this time, and I don't know, maybe Chazelle knew it was going to be divisive. And first, before we get into anything,
Yeah.
I just kind of want to say where I fall on Chazelle's filmography, because
Mhm.
I can't go without talking about these dismissive comments about La La Land, because that's like the top
I
five
knew
favorite movie.
I know. That's where
Yeah.
we always come down. We're on opposite ends of the spectrum with the 2016 debacle.
But regardless, I mean, I absolutely love La La Land. I think it's a cinematic masterpiece, as well as Whiplash, my two favorite films of the past decade.
Oh my
And
God, Whiplash,
I,
man.
dude, it still holds up to this day. I mean,
Still, still. I'll
nothing wrong
sometimes
with
go
it.
back and just watch the end drumming sequence on YouTube because that's how good it is.
Oh my goodness. I never thought drumming could ever be like that intense.
Could be
And
that
I'm just like at the
cinematic.
edge of my seat.
Yeah.
But yeah, and First Man, I was really, really excited for, obviously, because Damien Chazelle is up there being one of my favorite filmmakers just based on those two films alone. And First Man, I thought was really good, but as you said, it kind of got pretty boring by the end, and I just think that despite its technical prowess, it didn't really hit on that level that his other two films did. So I was wondering how this film was going to be, because this was my most anticipated movie of the year, being such a huge Damien Chazelle fan, and then I heard all the divisiveness surrounding it, and I was like, well, where am I going to fall on this movie, And I have to say, if I can get into it now,
Yeah, please do.
um,
Please do. We've circled around it enough.
it's certainly, it swings for the fences. I gotta give it that. And in some ways, I think I appreciate it that much more for that. Because look, I mean, this isn't the most consistent narrative that you're going to see. It isn't as polished, at least in regards to narrative structure, as his previous films. But for what it is, I loved it, man. I absolutely think that there's so much great filmmaking here, once again, as you'd expect from a Damien Chazelle film, with Tom Cross in the editing bay, and Linus Sandrin with the cinematography. I think the best shot film of the entire year. And Justin Horowitz's score, man. I mean, you give this man another Oscar as far as I'm concerned. It really is probably the best score of the year. But really, just I do think he goes a little too far in a couple places, and I'm not really 100% keen on that. But at the same time, just him creating this world of complete utter debauchery. It really is kind of a mix between Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, Singing in the Rain, The Wolf of Wall Street, just to name a few films that
I
really
throw Boogie
stand
Nights
out.
in there too.
And
There was
Boogie Nights, yeah, that was
some
the other one.
sequences in here that felt pulled directly from Boogie Nights. Like, and I'm like,
Yeah,
is this? I'm like, I almost felt like a Tarantino hater. I'm like, is this homage or is this straight ripping off? Like,
I think it's homage, but
Yeah.
I can totally see, because I know what you're talking about.
You know what scene
but
I'm talking about.
Yeah. But I feel like it is done in such an interesting way, because the thing I do love about this movie, because obviously I think we knew a lot about this stuff going on in that period of time, but actually seeing all of this on screen, it's like almost shocking. But I feel like the most shocking parts of the movie is when you see the really seedy underbelly stuff that was taking place in LA, that was absolutely beyond disturbing to me.
Yeah.
And I was talking to someone who said that was the stuff I really wanted to see more of, because it's like, this stuff probably happened, and that's probably the most disturbing thing about it. And so that's why in that sequence that we're kind of referring to, I was just completely like blown away by just the sheer horror of it all, and just the filmmaking bringing us along on this journey was just so, I don't want to say smooth, because the filmmaking certainly was smooth, but the narrative could have been a little bit more solid. But yeah, I was absolutely blown away by many, many parts of this movie.
Yeah, I think that so far, because again, the movie only opened like a couple days ago, so the review, and it's Christmas break, so people are still getting
Yeah.
around to see this movie. Like I said, it's going to be a while before the final take on this movie comes in for sure. But I think that for right now, I think the thing that the critics, because I can already tell this is a divisive movie, like I can already tell.
Yeah.
But it seems like the big point where the critics who love it versus the critics who hate it, the thing that they're kind of trying to figure out is whether this movie earns its big swings. Because I think the biggest thing that they're coming to is this is a movie that takes a lot of big swings. a lot of it in just so many different levels. And it has the technical craft to back it up for sure, because the technicals of this movie alone are this is probably
Amazing.
the most well-made movie of the year, from, if we're not counting like of the non like big CG spectacle affairs. I can't think of a movie that has more going on in every single section of every frame and
Sure.
makes its 3-hour runtime move as fast as it does. I mean, I haven't seen RRR yet, but this is 3-hour runtime and it felt like 2 hours. It
Yeah,
flew by.
yeah.
It was
It really I felt a little bit of it by the end, but it is an
right.
incredibly well-paced movie.
Yeah. But the biggest thing for me is it's like this movie is trying to say a lot about kind of that era of Hollywood and just about movie making in general. And I'm like, and for me at least, I know, and I think this is something that a lot of critics have in common, is I don't know if it earns that. Because here's the thing, is that Chazelle is a guy who you can tell loves movies and loves movie
Oh, yeah.
making and
Yeah.
everything. And he's, he is full smack dab into the millennial category. So he's one of those guys that's like always trying to be like a little bit edgier and different with what he's trying to say. He's like the thing that made Whiplash work so well is that Whiplash is still a relatable story where it's like, okay,
Yeah.
like how far are you willing to go for greatness, to the point where it almost literally kills you, And then I feel like with La La Land at first, man, feel like a little bit of that kind of got lost between the cracks, But this was probably his clearest thing yet, and it makes sense because it's off of it's modeled. The structure of this movie is modeled off of a very familiar structure, where it's telling the story about this certain period of time. You have this rise. The first half is about all the great stuff, them getting in, them wetting their feet, they're understanding how it works, and then pretty much just having this huge party, right? That's pretty much what the first hour and a half, 2 hours of the movie are. It's just one big, massive party. It's as much debauchery, it's as much hedonism, it's as much carnal stuff as you could possibly see. People, the opening party, which is like half the trailer that we saw, it's like people doing every form of drug imaginable and just going nuts and having fun. It's like whenever people talk about like, old Hollywood, it's like this is the stuff that they were talking about, underneath all of the class and the glitz and the glam. It was just a bunch of people who were going fucking ape shit with just everything. Like Boogie Nights could barely scratch the surface as far as like how crazy it goes. Like the 20, like there was a reason why this specific period of time like inspired. I mean, I feel like the closest that it came to before was Boardwalk Empire, but Boardwalk Empire was set on the East Coast. And so there's always, as debaucherous as us East Coasters get, there's always a certain level of restraint that comes with that I feel like the West Coast just doesn't have. I mean, I can't say for certain. I've never been out there, but just based off of all the people who I met from out there, it's like there was just a certain level of restraint that the West Coast just does not have. And it is just put on full display here. And as far as the different characters that it explores, it's like you could almost say that it's like, yeah, it's the different Boogie Nights trappings. You have the two newcomers that are like our introduction to the world. One who is, trying to make it behind the scenes, one who would like sees herself as a star, even though she doesn't necessarily have the backing. You have the veteran figure with Brad Pitt. You have like kind of the outsider figures who are kind of only used for their certain complexions, that being, the Sidney Palmer character, the Jovan Adepo character, and the what's it called? And the what is her name? The Lady Faye character, the Asian woman. And then you have like I don't know. You have Jean Smart in this part as like this Hedda Hopper-esque figure who's kind of like your muse that's just kind of there like narrating everything, and you're kind of just viewing the changing times through these characters. And like I said, it works really well because you're watching them change with the times. You're watching them grow, you're watching them change, you're watching certain that become outdated. Because the big thing that is established throughout is that like the idea of talking film and sound coming in. I think this is the first instance where that was really felt hard. And I think he accomplished that very, very well as far as it's like, yeah, like it feel like, okay, so essentially what Tarantino was trying to accomplish with Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, the fact that the encroaching 70s felt like the end of this era for, the that had been around for the longest time in Hollywood in 1969. Like he talked about this ad nauseum, the fact that that movie felt like it was what's it called? The fact that that movie felt like it was, the end of an era. It was the end of everything. Certain people just felt like the world was coming to an end almost, and that's kind of that's kind of the same as what's happened in this movie, where the introduction of sound and speaking into film literally felt like, it was the end of time for certain people. They viewed it as this crazy technological advancement and everything. But at the same time, again, it put a lot of people who all of a sudden were used to one way of acting and were used to one way of filmmaking that had really been the only way of filmmaking. And now it's like they have to change everything. You know, now all of a sudden you have stuntmen like Buster Keaton and some who had seen great success in the 20s now couldn't work because again, they sounded horrible. They just didn't have what it took for sounding. And, you know, you see that with the Margot Robbie character. You see that with the Brad Pitt character. You know, I think all that stuff, when the movie focuses on that, I think that's when it's at its strongest, you know, at least for me.
Okay, no, because like the thing is, talking about that transition, no period, right, from the silent film era to the sound film era. I mean, I think this film deals with it very well. I mean, especially the one sequence when they're trying to record the sound for the first time is absolutely incredible.
Yeah.
That's like one of my favorite scenes in the entire film. But I think when it comes to like thematic depth, when it comes to what they're dealing with here, I mean, we've obviously seen films like this before, like Singing in the Rain, and The Artist, and I do think it's better than The Artist, but like they basically straight up steal from Singing in the Rain multiple times in this movie, where
Oh,
La
yeah.
La Land is just kind of like an homage to it. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I get it. Because
But
La
this
La
movie,
Land
they're
was
like,
still its own
okay, let's
original.
actually like steal plot points.
Yeah. Because at the end of the day, La La Land was
Right,
still its
right.
own
But
original
this
story.
definitely, yeah, and this one definitely feels like it relies on and so obviously so, and I think to a fault, shows how much Damien Chazelle loves cinema, and I'm sure we'll get into that in a little bit.
Yeah, just a little bit. Yeah, because it's like you're right. Where there are some incredibly funny sequences in this too, and I think that's where again a lot of the power of this movie comes from. Is that this movie is so effing funny. Like they're like the opening party alone, and like just the introduction of Brad Pitt's character, where he's just babbling away in Italian. You know, it's hilarious. It's so freaking funny. It's like just like what are you doing, man? There's like half the time it's like just characters acting
Dude,
insane for no reason. But like I said, because it's you realize it that party is a metaphor for Hollywood, like because that's just what everyone viewed it as. It was just a party, you know. It was, but and I love how too they
right.
reflect that on the behind the scenes people, where it's like again everyone is just so stressed out and so miserable, but then when they get the shot, it's like yes, you know. And I like enough. I think nothing
Dude,
better described that feeling. Like that was PTSD flashbacks to college for both of us. I know that. So for me, it comes down to I think the biggest thing that this like we said that the movie has going for it is that Damien Chazelle very much has this massive, incredible love for movies, for cinema, for feature filmmaking that shows in every single frame. And when we're on the positive side, and like I said, when it's the homage to that, when you show the transitionary period of that, that's when this movie is at its strength. And I think that's when it works the best. And that's when we have some of the best sequences, some of the funniest sequences for sure, which is why I think the first hour and a half, that's the one that works the best. What about you?
Yeah, I absolutely agree. I think kind of what you were mentioning earlier about like getting out there and like getting the shot, like that whole sequence where showing how nerve-wracking and frustrating the filmmaking process can be. But then when you get everything together, like these magical moments happen that you perhaps didn't expect would make it all the more sweeter. And I think that is basically filmmaking in its essence. And I thought that that was like one of the most craziest and most beautiful sequences in the entire movie. And I think if he had tapped into that a little bit more, I think it would have been in some ways more than just homage, because I feel like, well, I wouldn't want to say that because La La Land was definitely a lot of homage, but it felt like its own story, where here it definitely borrowed from a lot of different things altogether. And so I definitely feel like that is probably where the film's strengths lie, as opposed to kind of like, because let's be honest, the narrative is a little inconsistent. It's still good by the second half, but uh, once you get to the end, well, here's the thing. I want to talk about the ending, all right, because
Yeah.
there were certain points of it where I was like, oh, 1952. I'm like, that reminds me of a film that came out that year. I
You're
wonder
like,
if,
yeah, it's
and
like
then of
I
course,
wonder
you
which
know,
movie they're gonna try
you
and
get
point
that.
at there.
Yeah.
It's yeah.
Hmm.
Well,
But
so it's like so leading up
but
to that, like, because I want to get to the
but
leading
even
up
with
to
that
that
being
part.
said, like
Yeah.
I by the end, I was almost in tears. And also I just have to mention how great Diego Calva is the lead. I think he might even be Oscar worthy in this movie. Don't know if he's going to get a nomination, maybe not even, but
Yeah.
especially in that scene alone, like almost brought me to tears. And then they do something that completely almost ruins the entire ending for me. And I was like, what the hell is this?
Yeah,
Why is this even,
I
this
know
is
what
so
you're I know
stupid.
exactly what you're talking about.
And it felt like I was watching like an AMC promo or something. It was like the stupidest bullshit I've seen in any movie this year. And I was like, my goodness, did you really have to ruin the moment with that? Because I got what he was getting for. And don't get me wrong, it's a feat in editing. Like, this film should absolutely, this or Everything Everywhere All at Once should absolutely win editing. I'm probably leaning towards Everything Everywhere All at Once. But, you know, I was
Except they're
just
gonna
like,
give it to
what is
Elvis,
going
and you
on? Like,
except you know they're gonna give it to Elvis though, because that's what they're gonna because that's what they do.
don't let's not put that out in the universe, okay? We don't
Too
want
late.
another
It's
Bohemian
already
Rhapsody,
too
but worse,
it's too
okay?
late. It's already too late. It's already happening.
If it gets nominated, I'm gonna be pissed, but besides the point, this is a much better edited film, I think we can agree. But I don't know, man. I think Chazelle, like, I get he loves movies, but I think he really botched the ending as opposed to Whiplash or La La Land, which some of the most craziest and most beautiful endings I've ever seen. And then I'm very split. I'm very split.
Yeah, it's okay, so I'll break down my feelings for the second half leading into the ending, because the second half is definitely where the movie kind of starts to lose me. Because okay, so you have the switch, right, when talkies officially become a thing, and you see the effects that it has in the characters. You know, it affects Margot Robbie first, where it's like she is somebody who, her kind of wild child, just nonstop crazy party side comes out and meshes perfectly with the silent era of movies, you know, when it's all about just like facial expression. You don't have to worry about anything else. And then it's like once sound comes in and it's like, oh, now she has to worry about all these other things, like, oh, she has to be heard and they have to record inside these hot, sweaty sound stages and she has to hit her marks and all this new terminology and things that like just feel like they go completely against what works for her as a performer. And then you see the effects on everybody else, you know, and like how certain people are able to prosper from that, maybe not in the way that they thought, you know, like there's a particular sequence in the middle with Sydney, and you know which scene I'm talking about, where it's like, oh man, you know, and it especially hits Brad Pitt's character the hardest, because Brad Pitt is a character who has been in the limelight and been popular and big for so long that he almost doesn't see, he almost thinks that he's immune to it, but at the end discovers that he is not, you know? And so all of that is like, again, you see like the breaking down, you know, the party's over. And it's like, now we're kind of transitioning, you know, if we're comparing this to Goodfellas and Wolf of Wall Street, this is the part where they're kind of like almost like struggling to remain relevant / running for their lives portion, where everything is like, there's, again, by the time I would say it's not until the third hour mark that it really becomes apparent, but it's like all of this stuff is happening, all these major shifts and changes are happening, and for the most part I was getting along with that. You know, there were particularly a couple of sequences near the end where I'm like, wow, I really feel and understand, you know, the pain that these characters are in. You know, the Brad Pitt, I mean, oh my God, like talk about a late career. I don't even know if like comeback is the word for it, but like I feel like ever since Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, it's like every movie that he has been in has just been like a hit, you know, like Hollywood, Bullet Train earlier this year, which was just so much fun. And now this, it's like, yeah, it just proves that Brad Pitt is still great. But there was something he did in this movie that I hadn't really seen with him before. And with this movie, it's almost like, and I don't know if this was intentional on the filmmaking or not, but it was his acknowledgement of the fact that he's like, yeah, I'm an older movie star now, because he's going to be 60 next year, which is mind-boggling. Like that's just crazy to me. And it's like, it was almost like this acknowledgement that he's like, yeah, I am the new Burt Reynolds. I am the new Paul Newman, you know, whichever old school star you want to say that Pitt models himself after. And like, he was carrying himself for the first time ever like an older guy, which is something I'd never seen from him before. And I feel like that just added a lot more weight to the performance. You know what? I think that's why probably that was easily the best performance of the movie. And that's why when he, spoiler alert, when he shoots himself at the end, it's like, and that's very heavily foreshadowed, I think, very obviously so. But it's like, yeah, like that, like I really felt that, like that hit me hard. You know, this idea of somebody who understands that they are no longer relevant, you know, like that. I don't know, like there was something that really that hit me hard about that, you know.
Yeah, and I think that whole segment where he's like talking to Jean Smart, I think is maybe the most compelling moment in the entire movie. And just what she has to say about longevity and just kind of like being immortalized by film. I mean, it was really so beautiful, because you would expect it to be sort of vindictive sort of, confrontation, but really it's something that she understands much more than he did at that moment in time. And I think really one of the emotional highlights of the entire film for me. And I just absolutely, I don't know. I definitely feel like a lot is televised by the end, and to its fault, but it's still an engaging story because I feel like they approach it in a way that's different. Like you kind of see how the people behind the scenes are the ones for the most part who thrive, and it's really more so the people who get stuck in the limelight that often get the shaft. And I think that's a brilliant way of approaching it in a way that I don't think Singing in the Rain or the artist kind of took that from.
Yeah, I agree. Singing in the Rain is very much so. Again, it's telling a lot, but it's still very much like a 50s musical, so it's still got a
Yeah.
lot of those trappings. And the artist, I feel like the artist's problem is it's trying too much just to be a silent movie, and I think that's kind of where it loses its luster, because outside of it's like again, the artist is trying to be indistinguishable from a Charlie Chaplin movie, but I feel like that, especially at the time that it was released in 2011, I feel like that was what kind of took away from some of the bigger things that it could have done. Now let's talk about the ending, specifically the ending of the movie, because that is the make or break for people, I think, which is where it is this. I don't even know where to describe it. So let's set the scene, right? So because we haven't even mentioned this one actor who I feel like is a big reason for why people are looking forward to this as well. That being Tobey Maguire, which is like that whole sequence is, oh man. Like, do you want to talk about that first before we get into the ending? Like that's almost when the third act is like starting to run out of steam, and you're like, we need something new. We need something to freshen it up. And I was sitting there with my friend in the theater, and they're like, yeah, we're going to give this guy money. Margot Robbie's in some gambling debts and this big gangster. So again, this is the scene we're talking about that's ripped right from Boogie Nights, which is where, again, like I'm talking about the scene where Mark Wahlberg, John C. Reilly, and Thomas Jane all go to see the Alfred Molina character, the Rahad Jackson character. Right. And like that, it's almost like they took it, painted it over with some 1930s aesthetic, and threw it in this movie where they're going to this ridiculous mansion, and you're going to see an income, and you're like, oh my God, because Tobey Maguire plays the gangster character, and it's like he's like this overgrown child as like this menacing gangster who is like really weird but also really menacing, and like he looks like a ghoul. He's playing it like a ghoul. It's almost like he's acknowledging the fact that it's like, yes, I am this like giant man child, but it's this almost 50-year-old man. It's might be the best thing I've ever seen from him. It's honestly kind of disturbing how good he is in it. And then it leads to just this bonkers sequence where they go into like the underbelly of LA, where you're seeing like all this crazy like BDSM, but not even that. Like there's alligators and people eating people and misformed people.
Rats.
And they go to this one giant dude who's eating rats. And then there's a sequence that involves something that may as well be Monopoly money. And it's like, so the resulting is that Diego Calva is forced to leave Hollywood. And he comes back 20 years later in 1952 at the Kinescope lot, and he goes and watches Singing in the Rain in the movie. And it's meant to be like, okay, this is what I've created. This is what Hollywood has come to. Things didn't end the way that people said they were going to. The movies will live on and all that. And it's true. I can tell it. I know exactly what it is. And there's a reason why this is the movie that comes out a year after we just got out of COVID. It's like, yes, movie theaters will go on. Movies will always continue to exist in some form or another. And then it devolves into this montage that basically breaks down like the history of the moving image from what was it from like the first like moving horse, with the first ever like camera invention, all the way through to Avatar, and then it ends in Avatar. And I'm like, is this trying to both simultaneously take a shot at James Cameron, since their movies are in theaters at the same time, and also say that Avatar was like the next natural endpoint of cinema? Is that what this is trying to say? Because if that's the case, I'm like,
dude, I
don't know how I feel about that. Like,
I was just so shocked he got to see Avatar that early. I don't know.
No, it was from the first one.
For me.
Did you tell that? No, that was from the first Avatar, not this most recent one. Yeah.
No, I know, because he also threw in T2, and I was just like, okay, but dude, I don't even know, man.
Yeah.
Like that whole sequence, it is just ridiculous to me. Because like, even if they went through like the horse to like singing in the rain, like everything that happened up until that point, that wouldn't make sense to me. What I'd put off by then we saw like Tron in like 2001. I'm like, what is going on? I mean, this is absolutely nuts to me. Um, and I think it absolutely doesn't work at all, but not enough to completely ruin the experience for me, because I think there's so like I understand what he was doing, and the parts with Diego Calva in that scene are amazing. And we haven't even hardly mentioned who I think yet again one of her best performances. Maybe not better than I, Tonya, or even how good she was in Bombshell, I would even say, but man, she is dynamite on screen. I hope she gets nominated for this. Honestly, she might not, but I hope she gets in over Viola Davis, if I'm being completely honest.
Oh yeah.
And I just think yeah, I mean it's pretty obvious, but I think there's scenes that are just so amazing too. To go back to what we were talking about, the filmmaking, like there's one tracking shot that goes through like this entire set, and I was just thinking, it obviously wasn't as ambitious as the freeway shutdown where they danced on the highway in La La Land, but I was still like, damn, I wish I could control a camera that well and get a shot that brilliant and set up so much going on in the frame without having to do a single cut. I mean, it's incredible. Once again, the filmmaking. So I really feel like, despite this film's shortcomings in a lot of way, I still really appreciate what Chazelle's going for through the entire thing, which is probably why I ended up loving it.
Yeah. I agree with that because, yeah, I mean, I feel like the magic was starting to be lost a little bit, but before we got to that montage, before the Tobey Maguire sequence just like amped it up, because I feel like if it was just the montage, it wouldn't have affected me. But there was definitely kind of a feeling of the movie losing its air before we even got to the montage, and the montage was like the final cherry on top. And so, in order to kind of like summarize how this kind of like ends up, while I still think that this is one of the most technically well-made movies of the year, how I still don't know if it's one of my favorites of the year, and why I don't know if I can reasonably put it in my top 10. And that is because Chazelle has kind of showed his hand, rather immaturely so, as far as being a part of the whole Marvel is the death of cinema kind of thing. And what I mean by that is I feel like he is deliberately trying to make a movie that is both showing Hollywood at its height and Hollywood at its most debaucherous, and is almost kind of shooting himself in the leg, where it's like he's showing like, kind of when movies were magical, but also showing like, oh, this is also what movies, what's it called? But also showing what movies, like what it takes to really be in movies, and what it takes to like really make them, and what it takes to like quote unquote create the magic that it is that people love, And I feel like the movie is constantly going back and forth and back and forth and back and forth on that. And it doesn't want to have a direct point and a direct answer. But I feel like when he does the whole, yes, this is this is going to be the last, I'm making this like it's the last movie that's ever going to be made, and then I'm going to show that like this is what movies have become. That's when I'm like, okay, you got to stop, because you're not adding anything to the conversation. You're not contributing anything that people haven't already said, and you're kind of showing your hand. Because my problem with people who think like that, with people who think that like, movies are dying, quote unquote, are show that they have never truly understood what movies as a form, why they work the way that they do, because movies aren't always going to exist. As far as the moving image is memory. That's what it is. Moving image is literal memory. I think Jean Smart says it best in the movie. It is literally the idea of preserving these people and these stories in time in a way that they can be viewed forever. Certain of them may be lost, but like that's always the point. And there's always going to be building and adding new technologies onto that, but it is always going to exist in some form. So that's why, to me, the idea of cinema is dead is kind of the equivalent of like, okay, boomer, and like, I wouldn't expect that from somebody like Chazelle, but I think that's why ultimately I can't enjoy this movie as much as I would like to, and that's even with all the problems heaped on top of it, because the problems with the movie I could get past, I could attribute those to it just being, again, just overtly homagey. It's a little bit too, what's it called? It's a little bit too up his own ass. All that I can just attribute it to that. But that's the point of no return for me, is the idea that he's trying to say, yes, movies are kind of dead in their format. And again, it's almost like the writing is literally on the wall. He opened this up against Avatar. He's taking shots at Cameron in the movie. He's kind of priding himself as like, yeah, look at what a filmmaker I am, with all the technical prowess here. And that's where I'm like, he's definitely feeling himself a little bit, and he's earned that right to feel himself a little bit. But when artists get to that point, it's like, you really, really, really got to be sure that what you're saying and what you're trying to put out there has some meaning. Because if not, you're really going to show your hand as being like way too like up your own ass, And it's crazy because I never like to say that about artists, ever.
I definitely have before, but and it won't be the last time that I'll say that about someone. I didn't really feel that he was like taking like an okay boomer mentality. I just always took it as like he just loves that era of film, and he just wants to kind of homage to it. And I don't know if he's taking shots at Cameron at all. I feel like if anything, he's like paying tribute to him with that terrible montage that we talked about. So I don't know, like that didn't bother me, more so just the other stuff, like the fact that we have seen this story done before and probably better. And I just think that regardless of how I feel about that, really it's just the filmmaking and what he was going for, regardless, that made me end up loving this film. But I'm just worried because when you talked about showing his hand too early, I kind of took that too as like what he did at the beginning of his career. I'm wondering if he'll ever have that capacity to top Whiplash or La La Land again, and I don't know. I do not know. Right. I still think that this is another great addition to his filmography, but I don't think it's anywhere near those two films.
No, yeah. And like, of course, this goes into the conversation of, again, how studios are turning more and more and more on the quote unquote Oscar bait movies, because now this is the year where there's going to be a lot of big budget, giant spectacle movies like Avatar, like Elvis, that are nominated, and I feel like now the smaller Oscar bait movies that are, for lack of a better word, just like, again, movies like this, we've talked about this ad nauseum, all the movies that the Oscars love, because those movies just aren't making money, and like I said, it's still too early to say, but like, if this movie doesn't make money, like, it's as far as like the only reason why these movies are made is kind of for Oscars. But it's like, if they're if people aren't watching them, then it's like, what's the point, and so that's what I'm also worried about as well, because it's like, I don't want filmmakers like this to stop making movies like this and stop taking big risks and stop taking big swings. But it certainly does feel like every single time a filmmaker does put out something like this, it gets torn to shreds. And it's like, I do understand where he's coming from when he says the idea of, it's like when people say, original material that is not homogenized doesn't work as well, because every single time it's like the reviews almost always kind of destroy it to death in a way, and it's like, because we've seen it time and time and time and time again, and people keep wondering, it's like, why do original ideas not get made? It's like, oh, because they don't make money. It's like, also because the people who are making the original ideas are making them kind of for themselves, and I think that's another problem that we find ourselves in with this day and age, is that the people who are making films, not like IP, because that's the biggest thing, is that IP is now for the common man, and films are made for the artists themselves. And I think that's also another big thing that is still not being talked about enough, that I'm hoping to talk about more once we get into the new year, because that'll be very interesting once we get into 2023 to see if people can start to avoid that, is artists making movies that other people want to watch, not just for themselves, And so that's kind of where I think that's a good logical point to end the conversation. But real quick, to your point about Margot Robbie, you're right. I mean, the only reason why I didn't feel the need to talk about her as much is because she just proved so many times now that she's a star, that like, this was just like the cherry on top. It's like, yeah, okay, she's been in this almost 10 years now, since Wolf of Wall Street, and like, yeah, she's awesome. She's absolutely amazing, and she owns every scene that she's in. And yeah, I really do hope that she's able to beat Viola Davis for that 5th Oscar spot, because she absolutely deserves it. So, final thoughts and star rating?
Yeah, so we're doing on a score of 5, right?
Yep.
Okay. Well, I guess in that case, I'll give Babylon 4.25 out of 5. I as I said, not to be redundant, I love this movie. I loved seeing all the underbelly Hollywood stuff, just all the debauchery going on, but certainly could have been a bit more focused and trimmed down. Of course, we could cut that montage out entirely, and I think the film would have hit a lot harder. But to leave your audience with that, not my favorite point to end the film off, but I really do think that it will still get nominated for picture. I think it will get nominated for the technical stuff like cinematography, score, editing, costume design, production design. Will probably win like 2 or 3 Oscars. But I'm glad I saw it, and I'm glad that I think Damien Chazelle is still a quality filmmaker, and I can't wait to see what he does next. Regardless, I just got to temper my expectations a little bit.
Yeah, definitely. I think that is to say the least, thing that we need to do is temper our expectations. Again, I just wanted to apologize for the audience again for the for the latency issues. That was obviously can't account for certain things, but I just wanted to throw that out there as well. For me, Babylon, yeah, this is a movie that I was very much looking forward to. It was a movie that I can't say that I was disappointed at, but I can't say that it's a movie that I particularly loved watching. I thought the first hour and a half of this was just so much fun to just be there and just to be like, feel like you're there in that era of Hollywood. And then the last hour and a half just kind of turned into like, I don't even know how to describe it, to end with just one of the most confusing endings possible. So for that, despite how good the craft is, I'm settling at a 3.8 out of 5 for right now. That might change later on as I come back to the movie. But Nathaniel, thanks again once again for joining me. Like I said, we recorded this a little bit earlier today. And like I said, we'll get the Glass Onion podcast out at some point before the end of the year, before we start season 5. I wanted to wish all of you once again a Merry Christmas, a Happy Holidays. Make sure you all stay home healthy. Nathaniel, where can the good people follow you on the interwebs?
Well, the good people can find me on YouTube at just my name, Nathaniel Ahart, but on Instagram and Twitter at Nathaniel_Ahart. And for you movie fans out there watching, we're about to get into the top 100 greatest films of all time. We're doing a series, a community vote. So if you guys want to submit a list to that, reach out to me on my socials or leave a comment on one of my videos, and I'd love to take your contributions and throw this list together. It's going to be a great series. I'm going to have Dom on too, so that's going to be a lot of fun. And yeah, guys, I'm going to put up my own Babylon review probably in the next day or so. So if you want to see a non-spoiler review for that, my more in-depth thoughts, be sure to tune in. And thanks again, Dom, for having me on the channel once again. I'm really glad I could come on and talk about this movie specifically.
Absolutely, man. I love having you on. I want you on for more episodes in the future. I will definitely try to have you on for more episodes in 2023. But once again, I just wanted to throw a shout out. Even though this is not our last episode of 2022, I wanted to give a shout out to all the people who have been tuning in with us throughout this year. It's been, like I said, it's been a big year. It's been a year of transition, but again, I think we may do with it, and I'm looking forward to what we're able to pull off in the new year as well. Once again, I am, of course, Dom the Movie Nerd. Be sure to subscribe to both this channel and the Twitch channel. Be sure to follow us on our audio channel, Spotify and Apple Podcasts. This episode will be up probably sometime, not until the new year on the audio channels. I still have to figure that out amongst just my schedule as everything is going on behind the scenes. But you can, of course, follow me at Movie Nerd Reviews across all platforms. Be sure to follow the official Talking TV podcast across all platforms. And we'll probably see you guys in the new year. Happy New Year. And as always, 12 seasons in a short film, and watch more fucking movies. We'll see you guys next time.